Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third and final Ed webinar in our Excellence Across the Curriculum Lunch and Learn Week. I'm Victoria, and I'm here with Amplify, and I am joining from Cleveland, Ohio. If you joined us on Monday and Tuesday for our two other sessions this week, we hope you enjoyed them, and we are so happy to have you back for our final session, Susan Lambert on the Science of Reading, Writing the Next Chapter Together. All right, and without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce our speaker today. Susan Lambert is the Chief Academic Officer of Elementary Humanities at Amplify and the host of Science of Reading, the podcast. Her career has been focused on creating high-quality learning environments using evidence-based practices. Susan is a mom of four, a grandma of four, a world traveler, and a collector of stories. As the host of Science of Reading, the podcast, Susan explores the increasing body of scientific research around how reading is best taught. As a former classroom teacher, administrator, and curriculum developer, Susan is dedicated to turning theory into best practices that educators can put right to use in the classroom and to showcasing national models of reading instruction excellence. Hi, Susan. We're so happy you're here today.
Hi, Victoria. Thanks for the introduction. Wow, that was really long. So it's kind of painful to sit through. We'll shorten that for the next one. So thanks everybody for joining. I'm really excited to join you again as we launch into a new school year. I saw so many people on Facebook this morning that their kids were starting school, including my grandson, who's in his last year of middle school this year. So it's just insane how fast time has gone. But with the new school year, new information on Science of Reading and writing the next chapter together. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this today. At Amplify, we are really committed to teachers, knowing that your job is almost impossible. And we're in your corner here, helping you, enhancing your understanding, but we just want to thank you for all the work that you do, whether you are directly in the classroom or you are an educator that influences and supports those teachers in the classroom. So thank you for all the work that you do. And I hope today you really leave with just a little bit of new information to help you in terms of guiding your understanding of what it takes to develop literacy. Before we begin, I just want to give you not only a thank you and shout out, but just a reminder of the importance of working together in your building. And so if you know anything about John Hattie's work, you know John Hattie has done many studies, meta-analysis to really find out what works best. And one of the highest impact strategy is called collective teacher efficacy. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is when you work together as a school staff and you actually believe that you're going to impact your students in a particular area, there's pretty good evidence that you're going to make that happen. And I just really want to encourage you to say that when you focus on goals and you're really committed to making a change, it typically translates into significant positive outcomes. And that effect size is about 1.57. In education, we say effect sizes of 0.5, 0.6 are pretty good. So this is just off the charts. And that also presumes that you're exploring and searching for evidence-based practices in whatever area you are trying to impact. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start, and if you've heard me at all ever do webinars or live, you always know that if I'm talking about the science of reading, I start with the Reading League's definition from their defining guide. I can't imagine that anybody on this webinar is not familiar with the Reading League at this point, but if you're not, make sure you just Google the Reading League, and you can Google the Reading League's defining guide, and it will take you to this PDF that you can download. And I keep this PDF on my computer. I reference it often. I find that definitions help ground us in the work. And I want to talk a little bit about the definition of the science of reading because there's still some misconceptions. And one of the misconceptions is that it's just a label to slap on curriculum materials or assessments or professional development, but it's not. The science of reading, by this definition, is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research. And it relates to issues in both reading and writing. So the misconception it's just about reading, not true. It's been conducted over the last 5 decades from across the world, thousands of studies that gives us this preponderance of evidence about how proficient reading and writing develop. And it's not just for intervention, but it's also to deliver that quality instruction that students need to prevent them for the need for later intervention. And so I hope that you saw a couple of places in there that we are really thinking about issues related to reading and writing. And we're going together, we're going to just agree that we're going to call that literacy. So again, science of reading, a myth that it's just about reading. It's not. Reading is about writing. And the invention of writing, if we never had it, we wouldn't need to read. So what is literacy then? So literacy is actually a secondary system, and it depends on language as a primary system. And if you are an effective teacher of reading and writing, you know a good deal about language. I hope that I can encourage you to think more deeply about language, how language influences both reading and writing, and how those layers of language are important in terms of students' reading and writing development. Just to give you a quick reminder, we're talking about all of these sort of layers of language. Phonology is the sound parts of a language. We need those things for both reading and writing. Morphology, the meaning parts of a language. Syntax, the construction of sentences. Semantics is the meaning system of a language. Pragmatics is how we use that language, and we use language differently in different contexts. And orthography is how we represent that language. And so we're going to unpack some of these, but just a reminder that everything we do in reading and writing, the foundation of it all is really language. We also have various modes of language, right? So oral language, listening and speaking, written language, reading and writing. And that's probably really familiar, right? Listening, speaking, reading, writing, all of those things you can see represented in standards. So English language arts is all about the modes of language, both oral and written language. And we're going to look really quickly at the developmental progression of these kinds of ideas. So you see there on the left, oral language and written language. You see up at the top, it says receptive and expressive. So as a reminder, receptive language is that language you take in. Expressive language is that language then you communicate or push out. Receptive language is always easier than expressive language. And oral language develops before written language. So when babies are born, before they're born, actually, they take in all of the sounds of the language around them, and they're listening. And over time, then they start to speak. And when they first start to speak or express that language, it's not perfect, right? So they have to practice to their articulation and their sound patterns. And before long, they're speaking in sentences. Written language, reading, obviously, receptive language, and that is the first thing that we do. Reading is actually much easier learning to read, albeit very complicated, and for many students takes time. But reading comes first, and then we learn to express our thoughts in writing. And writing is actually the hardest thing we ever ask our students to do. So if you think about forming a sentence, it's a lot easier to read a sentence on the page than it is to write a sentence on a piece of paper. And sort of keep these in mind, because reading and writing also are dependent on our oral language skills of listening and speaking. And particularly for our multilingual learners and emergent bilingual learners, we have to leverage that oral language, leverage that listening and speaking to help them then with their reading and writing and acquiring the English language. You can't have a science of reading presentation without talking about the simple view of reading. And if you're fans of the science of reading, follow the science of reading, you probably know the simple view of reading right now. And, it wasn't that many years ago that this was sort of a new idea. The idea that proficient reading is really a product of both word recognition and language comprehension. We're going to leverage this idea today, go a little into it, but help connect it to writing. You also are probably very familiar with the strands of early literacy development, Scarborough's rope. And you know that the simple view of reading is also represented here on Scarborough's rope. At the end of the rope, you see skilled reading. At the top is language comprehension, and the bottom is word recognition. And there's various elements of each thing that weave together and need to weave together really strongly to produce that skilled reading. Word recognition has to be automatic. Language comprehension develops over time. And if you're a lifelong learner, as most of us are, that always develops. So there is no ceiling on your language comprehension. Language comprehension involves knowledge and vocabulary. We're going to talk about sentence construction, reasoning when you're thinking about text, and then building this overall mental model about the text and what you're reading. Language comprehension, like I said, develops over time. And we need each one of these elements within language comprehension to develop so that we can be really strategic about how we approach text. And I'm going to say one thing about that, which is it doesn't matter if you're an early reader, if you're, in middle school or high school, or you're old like me. Every time you pick up a text, every time I pick up a text, I have to approach that text strategically. And I may do it differently depending on the kind of text that I read, but there is an activation of background knowledge. There's a place for me to understand that vocabulary. I'm actively working to connect one sentence to the other and building a mental model of that text. You do that every time you read. And so supporting our students in these language competencies will help them with their reading. Word recognition is a little bit different. Word recognition is what I call a one and done. Now, it's not that easy, obviously. We have to get kids to understand sounds and how those sounds are represented by letters, combinations of letters, and how we build that up into words. The goal of word recognition is not to create decoders. The goal of word recognition is for kids to automatically recognize those sound spelling patterns such that they can see the word and instantly recognize it. You don't develop automaticity through memorization. You develop automaticity through those sound spelling patterns and practice over and over and over again. We all know some kids get this faster than others. Some take more time and it takes more practice. But our ultimate goal is to get kids automatic in that word recognition so that they can use their cognitive energy to be really strategic in terms of what they're reading. So we talked about what literacy is. Literacy is reading and writing. And the really cool thing about reading and writing is their reciprocal processes. So, like any highly educated individual, I Googled the origin of the word reciprocal. And word origins are so fun. Kids love them, by the way. It is Latin in origin, and you'll notice that it's comprised of a couple of things. Re, meaning back, and pro, meaning forward. So if you think about that, reciprocal, back and forth, back and forth. And if we think about the reading and writing process as it relates to that word reciprocal, we're going to learn how reading, writing, taught in tandem or taught together can actually bootstrap our processes in terms of literacy in reading and writing. It used to be that you had a reading workshop time and a writing workshop time, and those things were a little bit disconnected. We want to make sure we integrate that instruction, and we're going to look at some evidence and some examples about why that's so important. So now that we know the word origin, then we can also look then at the definition. And you can see that it's an adjective. It's given, felt, or done in return. It is bearing on or binding each of the two parties equally. And I love this idea of binding, right? We can use reading and writing instruction together and bind them together to make really strong literacy achievement in our students. So this isn't a new idea. Way back in 2000, and even before that, Tim Shanahan was doing some writing about this idea of the relationship between reading and writing. If you remember, the year 2000 was the year that the National Reading Panel report came out. And it was that year that Fitzgerald and Shanahan published this article, which, by the way, you can Google reading and writing relations and their development, the title of this article, and you can have free access to it. I really encourage you to do that because it's a great one. Essentially, they outlined what they called the shared knowledge model. And what this model does is it really sort of thinks about this body of knowledge, right? Like, so we'll think of it like this well of information, these things that we know and the skills that we have. And reading and writing both pull from that same common well, or they're sort of like two things built on the same foundation, which means the skills that we have, the literacy skills that we have, we can employ them for reading and we can employ them for writing. We don't do it in the same way, but we still draw on those same knowledge and skills to help us be successful with both. He includes a table in this article, which is really cool. And we're not going to go through each step of it. We're going to come back to it later in the presentation, but you can see, right, this idea of readers and writers use this meta knowledge about the function and purpose for reading and writing, right? They use some domain knowledge, prior knowledge, content knowledge, vocabulary. They use knowledge about text attributes. So letter and word identification, phonological awareness, grapheme awareness, syntax. We're going to talk about the importance of that. So all of these things are sort of what they've outlined as this bucket of knowledge and skills that we draw from, literate individuals draw from when they both read and write. So I'm going to make a connection now and introduce you to the simple view of writing. Now, we know there's lots of different models that define skilled reading. There's lots of different models that define skilled writing as well. So there's the not so simple view of writing. There's a writing rope that we have. And I like to use this simple view of writing because it distills it into the two important elements of skilled writing, just like we distill it with the two cognitive capacities for this in the simple view of reading for skilled reading. And so we want to look at how these two things are related. So the simple view of reading essentially says that skilled writing means you have to have strong transcription skills and strong composition skills. What does that mean? Well, transcription skills are handwriting and spelling. It's the skills we need to have to actually form the words, write the words legibly, so people can actually read them. You can think about transcription skills a little bit like word recognition skills in that we need to build them to automaticity. When you can automatically form the letters and spell the words, you can then use your cognitive capacity to compose the text that you want to compose. So composition skills include knowledge, word choice, syntax, the structure of what you're putting together. And we're going to see that this is really similar to that language skills that you need to have for reading. So skilled reading or skilled writing involves two buckets of skills that are really important so that your writing is legible and your writing is clear, that you can clearly communicate your ideas. Science of reading the next chapter, right? I like to call this literacy, that we have to think about skilled reading and skilled writing as reciprocal and related processes, that word recognition and transcription skills need to be built to automaticity so that our cognitive energy can go to understanding the language we're reading and composing using language to compose text for others to read. And we're going to unpack this a little bit so that we can see how these two things are related, and we can start to think about then what it is classroom instruction should look like to ensure these two things are developing in tandem. Before we get there, though, I want to show you, again, you can Google the title of this article and get access to this. It's an open access article. But it's really interesting because what the authors of this article did is they looked at the relationship between reading and writing in different grain sizes, meaning different elements of those layers of language. And they found that they're not related uniformly, right? So it depends on the size. If we're looking at, the phonemes or the morphemes, it depends on the grain size of the language. But overall, they found that reading and writing are strongly related with a magnitude of 0.72. Well, Susan, what does that mean? It means that a perfect correlation is 1.0. So if they were exactly connected and exactly related, the relationship would be 1.0. The relationship is 0.72. That means that they're overall correlated or they're related at a really strong level. And as you can see in their statement, the results indicate that reading and writing are not independent skills. That sort of follows with that shared knowledge model, right? Reading and writing aren't independent. They're related to each other. They're drawn from the same body of knowledge information, and then we shouldn't be teaching them separately. So I'm going to use, you notice that I don't title this slide Scarborough's wrote, because if you go back to the original article that she wrote it, she talks about this as strands of early literacy development. And she describes this obviously in relationship to skilled reading, but I'm going to show you, and based on that last slide, remember the relationship between reading and writing is so high, I'm going to show you how we can apply and think about this when we're thinking about writing as well. Composition, we're going to think about it in relationship to language comprehension. And transcription, we're going to think about it in relationship to word recognition. So I want to start there with transcription. And the reason that I'm going to start there is because these are the things we have to build to automaticity. Once we learn them, they're essentially done, right? Once we learn how to recognize words, we don't have to go back and relearn that. We have to employ a strategy every once in a while if we come to a word we've never seen before. But generally, for most of us, with enough reading and practice, we come to recognize words pretty easily. And it's the same with transcription. We need to practice to be able to form those letters and spell those words. But once we get that automatic, we don't have to go back and relearn it unless we come to a word, right, that we actually have to pull apart. So what are transcription skills? Transcription skills are the foundational writing skills that are required for a writer to transcribe the ideas in their head on a piece of paper. And we literally mean letter formation, so handwriting. And what we know from the research is that handwriting draws on that orthographic coding process. And when you teach handwriting in tandem with sound spelling patterns and phonics, you actually make that learning sticky. So kids taking pencil to paper, forming the letters of the sounds that they hear, and spelling the words actually helps them with both reading and with writing. And of course, spelling draws on that orthographic and phonological coding. Just talked about that, right? I can't say it too many times, is we need to have this automatic just like we need to have word recognition automatic. We don't want kids laboring over how to form letters or how to spell words because it takes away then from their composition. So transcription skills should be practiced to automaticity. And you know what? Spelling will actually help us understand how well students are reading or have mastered that code. So backtrack back to that slide that showed the developmental progression of the skills. And I said that when we're thinking about writing, it is the hardest thing we ask our kids to do. You can read words or take in words faster than what you can express or write words. So if you want to assess kids on how well they've mastered that code, spelling will give an insight into what's happening in terms of their learning progression. I'll tell you what, I think spelling is a hot new topic. We're going to talk about sentences. That's a hot new topic too. But spelling is a hot new topic in the science of reading world, and there is some great information out there on why it's so important. I was talking with a group of teachers in Idaho Falls, Idaho on Monday. Wow, that was hard to say. And we were talking about dictation. And dictation feels like it's so 1940s, doesn't it? But the reason that we do dictation with students at the sentence level is to help reveal how well students are in developing automaticity in their writing. And it will give you a lot of insight. Okay, enough on that one. Let's talk a little bit of composition skills. So why did I start with word recognition and that transcription first? Because again, automaticity frees up cognitive energy. And when you're reading, if you're stumbling over words, it takes away from your comprehension. Likewise, when you're writing, if you're stumbling over letter formation and spelling, it takes away the cognitive energy that you need for composition. So let's dive into composition just a little bit. What is composition? Well, it's those language skills that are required to think about and organize ideas that a writer wants to convey. You hear those two areas? Required to think about and then organize that. You know what? Oral language is a great way to get kids to start thinking about what they want to write about. So don't forget that. So first of all, composition skills draws on knowledge and vocabulary. You can't write about something that you don't know about. You need to know a topic deeply to be able to write about it effectively. And when you know about that topic, you will have vocabulary associated with that topic. And so knowledge and vocabulary are really important when we're thinking about composing. You also need to think about organization skills. So organization draws on syntax, it draws on text structures, it draws on genre, it draws on audience. And so just because you know a lot about a topic and have the words to be able to describe it, that's not the same sort of process as organizing that information in a way that actually makes sense. So, language is the foundation of everything, friends. One, you can't write about things you don't know about, and written language is more complex than spoken language. So remember the oral language we talked about and the written language we talked about? Draw on that spoken language to help organize your thoughts. But written language is more formal and much more complex. It wasn't that long ago that we were working on a writing project, and we actually got together and chatted about it, talked about the ideas that we wanted to get down on paper. And as adults, we do this, right? For complex writing exercises, typically you employ spoken language to work through and work out your ideas. But that's only the first step of the process. You then have to get those ideas down on paper. I want to quickly go back to the categories of knowledge that readers and writers use from this shared knowledge model. I'm telling you, this paper is just really great. And if I were still in a school, and I would pull my grade level team together and we would be talking about how we see all of these different things woven through the reading and writing instruction that we're doing with our students. But notice the place that I've circled, this domain knowledge about substance and content. And you can see there that readers bring prior knowledge to a text. And when they're reading a text, they actually gain new knowledge. So that happens during reading and writing. Same thing with writing. If you have your kids write in response to a text, or you have them do some sort of writing activity where they're trying to pull apart ideas, that process of writing will actually help them learn deeper the content that they're engaged with. And this includes semantics, so vocabulary meanings, and also the meaning that's created through this connected text. What do those two things mean and why are they so important? Well, we know with vocabulary instruction should never happen outside of content. whether you're engaging with that content orally or whether you're engaging that content in a written form. We also know that vocabulary has to be built both breadth, we need depth of vocabulary, and we need to be able to use that vocabulary flexibly. So in the reading process, we can see how an author uses a word and what kind of nuances are with that use of the word. As a writer, we have to decide which word we want to use to get just right meaning. And that application of vocabulary, again, if a student is using a vocabulary word appropriately in their writing, it's a good indication that they have a good handle on that vocabulary. And then this idea of meaning created through the context of connected text, we know how that works in reading, right? So as a reader, you're creating meaning, and the longer the text, the more meaning you're trying to make in terms of what the author has written. For a writer, you have to construct that meaning. And so you have to have, again, a lot of knowledge about a topic, the right kind of vocabulary words about a topic to actually then put your meaning down on paper so that readers of that text can create the meaning that you intended. That's pretty complicated. We're going to talk a little bit more about that too. So, knowledge and vocabulary in these strands of early literacy development, we know that background knowledge, prior knowledge, background knowledge, world knowledge, all of that knowledge is super important to comprehending text along with vocabulary. But we now see that it's even more important to know what you're talking about when you go to write a text. So I want to do a little unpacking of this thing called sentences and syntax. And I don't know how many are on the webinar today that have also noticed that sentences are really having their day. And I would say that the sentence is so important to both reading comprehension and likewise to writing composition. The sentence is the heart of everything. And as a reader, if you're not comprehending at the sentence level, you can never put those sentences together to comprehend at the paragraph level or the overall text level. So comprehension breaks down first at the sentence level. For a writer with lots of ideas in their head, they maybe know how they want to structure their writing. The hardest thing to do is to actually form a sentence to communicate that idea or to begin to communicate that idea. If you've ever, and I do this all the time, I go for a walk with my dog. I've got these great ideas. I'm going to come home and I'm going to write it down on paper. And you're like, I don't even know how to get that first sentence out. So you start planning and you do bullet points. And then you try to convert them to sentences, but the act of sentence creation is really, really complicated. So we use this word syntax often, right? So what does the word syntax mean? It's a little bit different than sentences, but what is syntax? Syntax overall is just how we arrange words and phrases to create sentences. And if you think about a young child before they come to school, they are actually have an innate sense of syntax. They can typically use complete sentences. They've been around the language. Chomsky, the great linguist, would say that it's probably biological. They probably just are born with the ability to be able to create these well-formed sentences. Think about, early grade teachers. How many kindergarten teachers say, please answer that in a complete sentence, right? We're helping kids in the oral environment make sense of this thing we called a sentence. A sentence then is words that we put together they have a subject, have a predicate, right? Like it's a very specific thing. Syntax is how we put those words together. The sentence is the thing that we're trying to get at. And the sentence is the important thing that we want to teach kids because, like I said, sentence level conveys so much meaning And it's so important to create meaning at that sentence level. So I actually love this. Plumley was a poet, and he wrote a little bit about how, what his poems were like at the beginning. And I'd just like you to listen as I read this, because I think it'll help make sense and put this all in context. So my first poems were prose poems, moments of specific experience realized in sentences, best word, best order. After the sentence, then comes the paragraph, which is really a form of the sentence writ larger, fuller, deeper, filled with balance. And the balance is the beautiful part. And after the paragraph or the stanza comes the whole piece, whatever. I love his definition of a sentence, a best word in best order. So he talks about word choice and syntax here. And he also talks about how your overall text is built sentence by sentence by sentence by sentence. And as that text builds, we want to balance that thing to really communicate just the right piece of information. So sentences, best word, best order. I don't know, I think sentences are my new favorite thing. I am so in love with the thought of sentences for a couple of reasons. First of all, they hold immense importance in facilitating effective communication. If you can't get your ideas out, whether orally or written in specific sentences, it's really hard for you to communicate and convey your thoughts, your emotions, and your information with clarity and precision. And I love these two words, clarity and precision. And right? When you hear people talk, some people are more precise in their oral communication, are more clear in their communication than others. And it's the same way in writing. And sentences really help us to be able to do that as we think about them. Sentences are the fundamental building blocks of communication. They form the backbone of written and spoken language, and so understanding their significance is really crucial for effective communication. We're going to dive a little bit more into that. Building blocks of writing, or the sentence level writing. So what do I mean by building blocks of writing? Well, I mean that we're going to focus on the sentence. We're going to think about how to organize ideas to best convey. And then we're going to remember that we need to leverage oral language. I can't say that enough. Make sure, well, in reading too, but also in writing, that we're leveraging oral language. Language comprehension comes pretty naturally to most of us. We're born to be communicators. We don't all develop the same way in terms of oral language, but we can leverage that innate ability to communicate to help us then with the unnatural thing of reading and writing. So sentences. What do we want to teach our kids in terms of sentences? Well, the research will tell us that we want to teach sentence types, we want to help them with sentence expansion, and we want to help them with sentence combining. And we're going to walk through each one of those. But you can see how already you can use this in reading as we're looking at text and help kids then formulate them in terms of writing. Make sure your writing instruction pays attention to sentence level. The other thing that's high impact is really organization. Anything that will help kids plan, generate, and organize their ideas for writing will really help them move them along in the process. Remember the example I used? When I take my dog Franklin for a walk, I get all these ideas in my head, and I can't just come right home and start writing sentences. I have to make sure I do something to plan and organize that to ensure that I'm effectively communicating what I want to communicate. I think sometimes we think that graphic organizers that help plan are just, maybe they're fun activities, but they're really important activities because they're the ones where kids are starting then to play with the ideas or the thoughts to help them then represent those. I don't need to tell any of you this, right? You know the basic sentence types. These basic sentence types, super important to teach kids both orally, have them identify them in print, and have them practice writing. What are the purpose for each one of these, right? That's what you go through when you teach those sentence types. What about sentence expansion? So if you know the writing revolution, you know the writing revolution also does something like this. It actually comes from Steve Graham's work, and we can link you to that research. I don't know if I put that slide in or not, but there are a couple of IES practice guides. You can Google IES practice guides for writing and see how important sentence expansion is. So if you're here right now and you work to support teachers in professional development, this kind of because but so activity is also really good to use with adults, because as you can see, if you were going to complete these sentences about sentences, these expansion because but so makes you think from a different perspective about a similar topic. And it can really uncover ideas at a different level. This is a great activity to do across content areas, but it really helps kids focus on composing sentences and understanding how to use sentences differently in their writing. It's also a great way to do with reading. Identify sentences that use one of the because, but, or so. What about fanboys? I've talked with many groups about fanboys, and I think I've only encountered one who said, yes, I actually was taught fanboys to combine sentences. And so this is just a good reminder that helping to take individual sentences and put them together will help kids understand how to use those complex sentences to communicate ideas effectively. I was also on Colorado's site, which is all about supporting our multilingual and emergent bilinguals. Sentence combining is a high impact strategy for students that are developing a second language, because it helps them then at the language level, right? So remember, writing is all about language as its base. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to write a short paragraph that describes your favorite summer mixed drink, include details about the ingredients and the procedure used to create the drink. So I'll just stop and let you do that. I'm actually really kidding. I'm not going to have you do that. I'm using this as an example. So if you loved summer mixed drinks and you like to make summer mixed drinks at home, you would know exactly what to do and how to approach this text. Maybe you don't like to make summer mixed drinks at home, but you will go out and have mixed drinks. You may not be able to do quite as well describing, using details and the procedure. If you are not a mixed drinker at all, you would have no idea how to approach this paragraph and sort of write this paragraph. I use this as an example to say, be careful what you're asking your students to write. And I remember back on my time in the classroom, I don't think I ever taught writing. I don't think I knew how to teach writing, but I gave my kids a lot of writing activities. And some of those activities I didn't really prepare them for. So if we go back to think about what we talked about in terms of composing text, if you haven't given them the background knowledge and the vocabulary in which to write a piece of even a paragraph, right? If they don't know anything about what you're asking them to write, you're not setting them up for success. And I think about this one at back to school time, because how many teachers like to do the write a paragraph about your favorite thing you did this summer, the most exciting thing you did this summer. And you may have kids in your classroom that really had a bad summer. It was really horrible. They did nothing fun. And so really be careful in thinking about the kind of prompts that you give your students, how that's going to impact your class overall, and did you prepare those students to be able to write what you need them to write? That said, text composition or any kind of writing should always be in relationship to whatever you're reading or the content that you're actually talking about in the classroom. And so writing is a great way to carry over into all of the content areas, not just English language arts. Okay, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. What about some high impact composition strategies? Well, I think we've talked about some of these. Build domain knowledge and vocabulary. Build that first. Talk about it in different settings, and then have students write a composition about it. Explicitly teach all the text types. And I know it's in our standards. We should be doing this, but it's not just exposure to these text types. It's actually explicitly teaching them. You can start with reading, right? Looking at text types, explaining the features of each of those types so that when they're ready to write those text types, they're supported with the experience already in their reading. And make sure you're doing lots of pre-planning. And this can be discussions, graphic organizers, outlines, checklists, anything that helps kids sort of get these ideas in their head and figure out how to transition them to paper. These pre-planning writing activities actually have been shown to have high impact on later writing outcomes. And again, like, think about your own experiences with writing and think about how you approach writing. I don't know if you've written an essay over the summer. If you did, you're probably taking a college class, but I can guess that you probably wrote an email or two. And when you sit down to write an email and you think about how you're going to start that email, what you're going to put in terms of the content of the email, it's not quite as easy as what we think it is. And especially if those emails are hard to write, or they're about a complicated process, or it's some kind of conflict or something like that. Those pre-planning things are super important to help our students then be able to work through their ideas. Okay, this is a really big quote, and I understand it's really big. We're going to unpack it in two different ways, and we're going to see this idea and this connection of language processing as we're talking about reading and writing. I'm going to read it, and I want you to just think about what it's saying before we pull it apart. Spelling and writing are a visible record of language processing. They may indicate exactly which aspects of print and speech are eluding the student, where the student is in the progression of reading and spelling development, and where the instruction should focus. I've made a couple of things orange: spelling and writing. So sort of think about transcription and composition. Visible record of language processing. Remember, the underlying theme here is that literacy is built on the foundation of language. Print and speech. Think about that in terms of word recognition, language comprehension, right? Those two elements. So when we actually look at students' spelling and we look at students' overall writing, we get an inside track into where they may need support. Strands of early literacy development, right? Remember that. Remember how this is related to that overall language development. Increasingly automatic. I'm going to go back one slide. This is the word recognition side, transcription side, okay? We want kids to be increasingly automatic. When we talk about automaticity in reading, we want kids to recognize words on the page, not sound them out, not memorize them, but recognize them because they know the phonemic patterns and they know the morphological patterns to be able to just recognize these words. I'm going to guess that none of you had to decode any of those words on that slide. Automaticity in writing is important too. Think about the words that trip you up. I don't know what words that you have a hard time writing. Mine is always vacuum. My daughter makes fun of me all the time for it. Just the other day, mind you, my daughter's 36. She came waltzing in the house and she's like, "Do you know how to spell vacuum yet?" It's like, nope, I don't. Why do I use as an example? Because if I were going to write a paragraph whether I'm writing it by hand or spelling it. And if I wanted to use the word vacuum in that sentence, it's going to stop me, right? I'm going to have to stop and think about it. And it's going to keep me from that construction, that language construction, right? It's just like when you're not automatic reading, that the lack of automaticity keeps you from comprehending the overall sentence or passage. The same way with writing. We want to make that really automatic. Okay, what's the relevant part of that quote we read before? Well, here's the relevant part. Remember, spelling is a visible record of language processing. At the word level, right? It may indicate exactly which aspects of print are eluding the student and where your instruction should focus. So if kids can't spell the word share, or whatever other words or patterns it might be, it will give you an indication that their code knowledge is not secure yet in that area. All right, top of the rope. Now we're talking about language, right? Language comprehension, which we want to be increasingly strategic as we approach reading and writing. And I think I've said it maybe twice, 3 times. I'll say it one more time. The top of the rope, there's no limits, right? The sky is the limit in terms of how much language we can learn and then apply. But we're always strategic. So what do strategic readers do? They construct meaning by interacting with text, which requires fluent reading, got to be automatic and have some fluency, fluent reading to allow the reader to focus on the meaning of the words, the meaning of the sentences, and the overall text. So if you needed another reminder of why automaticity in reading is so important, here is your reminder. Well, what does this mean for strategic writing? Well, strategic writers communicate meaning by constructing text, which requires fluent writing to allow the writer to focus on the construction of sentences and paragraphs. Next time you go to write a paragraph, whether it's an email or whatever, a letter, whatever you're going to write, think about the amount of energy it takes you to be able to do that. I mean, there's some days when I have to do writing that it's like, I can't. My brain's just not working. It's a really, really tough process. And we want to make sure that kids can use their cognitive energy to do that and not worry about how to form letters or spell words. Back to that quote, let's unpack this now on the writing side. So writing is a visible record of language processing. It may indicate which aspects of speech are eluding the student. What do I mean by that? Well, remember, oral language, all the things we know, all the words we say, all the ways we put sentences together. If we can't do that in speech, it's going to be really difficult for us to do that and put it down on paper, which is why we want kids to practice in the oral language environment, because I've said it before too, written language is much more complex than spoken language. And practice with spoken language will help kids make that connection. Another article that is so worth downloading, and I think you can actually get access to this one too for free. You may have to give it your information or something. But this is well worth the read. And for those of you that are geeks about writing research, Steve Graham is really just premier, right? He's been working on writing research for years and years. And if you're podcast listeners and you didn't catch the episode with Steve Graham, I encourage you to catch it and go back and re-listen. But he will contend that sciences of reading and writing are too narrowly focused on how to teach either reading or writing, and not focused enough on how the two skills can be used to support each other. So I really encourage you to start thinking about how that integration actually works in your classroom and in the classrooms for the schools in which you interact with. Shameless plug for the podcast, new season coming up. You know what we're doing in this new season? It's our next chapter. We're going to reboot that reading research, but we're going to extend it in writing. So we're going to talk about the elements of literacy and how they apply to both reading and writing, because you should be doing that together in your classrooms. Another shameless plug for Science of Reading the Learning Lab. If you're looking for an asynchronous course that you can do pretty quickly, low cost, grab that QR code right there. There's a couple of online courses available now. A third one is in the works. We don't really have time for questions and answers, but I think, Victoria, are you there to talk about the reading takeover week?
Yes, I am here. And Susan, I just want to say that was absolutely incredible. I learned every time I'm on a webinar with you, I just learn something new. And, I've been doing webinars with you for a long time. So thank you so much for this.
Oh,
But
thank
yes, we
you.
are very excited to have Susan back with us for a literacy takeover week. It's going to be a full week of webinars hosted on Zoom, and you can learn more there. But we're going to really dig into writing, the science of writing, the science of reading, of course. We're going to talk about just all sorts of things, data, MTSS, everything. And you'll hear from Lacey Robinson, Natalie Wexler, and Judy Hockman, Nancy Hennessy, and of course, you'll hear again from Susan. We're really excited about this webinar series, so please register now, and we'll hopefully see you there. And then finally, we did a plug for our Science of Reading podcast, but I also want to mention that we have a brand new podcast, which isn't just literacy focused. It really covers all disciplines, and it celebrates teachers, both veteran teachers and brand new teachers. Beyond My Years launched last week, and we had a special guest, Joyce Abbott on, which is just absolutely incredible. If you've seen Abbott Elementary, she was really the inspiration for that show. So please make sure to check out Beyond My Years wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you again for joining, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.